John Draper, I'm under this rumor that Vic has a famous cousin.
I have heard that too, and I'm not sure it's true or not. Let's check it out.
Well, just before we test it, I mean, if it's true, wouldn't you expect more humor from Vic than we get normally?
Well, no, I think he's got to be the straight man in the family, right?
Well, I'll tell you what.
Yeah. Look, wait a minute. First of all, my cousin has a famous cousin. Let's get that clear.
Well, before we get to that, let's get this program on the road, and then we'll come back.
Let's do it.
Welcome aboard Lifelines with David and John, your guide to charting the transformative course of crisis intervention and the game-changing 988 Lifeline.
Well, hey there. Welcome back to the 988 Lifelines podcast with John and David. And wow, we only do a podcast because of the Strong Talk forerunner and our friend and mentor and colleague. Wow, it's terrific today to have Vic Armstrong on the program. But every week, subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us wherever you get your podcast. We're bringing you the history and legacy of crisis care of 988. And we're also looking to the future. I'm David Covington with Recovery Innovations, and Vic's one of our board members. We're the premier facility crisis provider across 7 states with 13 facilities and hundreds of recliners and short-term crisis beds that we're working with individuals. But today, John, we're here sponsored by Behavioral Health Link. John, tell us a little bit from your vantage point about our famous guest that we have with us today.
Yeah. Curb your enthusiasm, everybody, because we have Vic. Well, some of you know him from the Strong Talk podcast, but many others may know him from his current role as the VP of Health Equity and Engagement at the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, or in his role as the director of Soul Shop for Black churches, or as Chief Diversity Officer at RA International, or previously in his sense as North Carolina's Department of Health and Human Services Chief Health Equity Officer, maybe even as North Carolina's Commissioner of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse. As you're probably getting the idea, this guy has been everywhere, influencing everybody in so many ways, particularly as a nationally recognized speaker on issues regarding behavioral health equity and access to healthcare. We are so thrilled to have our good friend and leader, Vic Armstrong, with us here today.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. I have to tell you, listening to that intro, I was thinking that guy sounds really old.
Well, yeah. Vic, I reference Recovery Innovations, but this podcast is sponsored by Behavioral Health Link, and it comes from the heart of Atlanta. So please, we won't be referencing others that are, trailing in the field today. Coca-Cola has its international corporate headquarters in Atlanta, and it's a bastion of not just Atlanta, but Georgia. Now, let's shift to another discussion, though.
Yeah.
And that is, we need to know who's funnier. Who's funnier? Let's start with John Draper. I'll start with you first. Who's funnier, Vic Armstrong or David Covington? I want to hear an accurate answer.
Can I tell you at the end of the show?
All right. How about this one? Is it true JB Smoove is your cousin?
JB Smoove is my cousin. He and his mom and my mom were sisters. My mom passed away about 7 years ago, but my mom was his mom's sister.
He was amazing on Curb Your Enthusiasm this finale season was crazy. So Vic, I know he's your cousin, but we need you to take that family blood aside.
Got it.
And we need some objectivity for a moment.
Okay.
JB or Dave? Who's funnier?
Dave Chappelle?
Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle. Woo, that's tough.
Dave's social commentary, sharp,
Look,
aware.
let me put it this way. It's a different type of comedy.
Very different style. Yeah.
So there's different styles. There's Dave Chappelle, and I'll give you my top 3 comedians.
Okay.
All right, let's
Dave
hear 'em.
Chappelle, JB Smoove, Kevin Hart. Those are my top 3.
So you're saying that JB Smoove is funnier than Chris Rock?
Yes.
Oh,
I am saying that. Yes.
you're saying that JB Smoove is funnier than Kevin Hart?
That's
Now Kevin Hart and Dave Chappelle, those are my goats. They are, they're kind of
even.
They're both kind of sitting here, and I'll put
all
JB
different.
Smoove. And I've seen all 3 in concert. So
I'll put
I have a frame
JB
of reference
Smoove here and Kevin Hart here. Oh,
Okay.
wait, we were talking about height. Sorry.
Oh, that was
Amy Schumer or Tiffany Haddish?
Amy Schumer.
Tiffany's funny though, right? It's bold.
It is.
outrageous.
It's not my style. And it's kind of the thing with Tiffany too is it's always like I've seen her in movies, I've seen her stand up, and it's kind of, to me, it's always the same character. Amy Schumer to me has a little bit more range and can kind of talk about a little bit more different things to me than Tiffany Haddish. And plus, Amy Schumer I think has been doing a little bit longer than Tiffany Haddish. So right now I'd say Amy Schumer.
Yeah, she's got her own show.
Yeah. 2 quick ones, Vic. Ali Wong or Joe Coy?
Being that I don't know who either one of those are.
Did you not see Beef?
Beef is great. Yeah.
Beef was great. John Mulaney or Eddie Murphy?
Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, of course.
Eddie Murphy's one of those folks
He's
that
a
just
legend.
kind of, he's a legend. He's like Richard Pryor status. You don't really compare him to anybody.
Yeah.
So JB in person, is it the same kind of personality, or is that all a show thing?
He is always the same guy. I think of him like this. I remember back a few years ago when they did the Harlem Nights movie and had Della Reese in it and Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy and Red Fox. And I remember Della Reese in an interview said, Eddie Murphy is funny, but he tries to be funny. Richard Pryor is funny, but he's not trying to be, even when he's not trying to be funny. And Red Fox is just funny.
Yeah.
Now,
JB
Red
is
Fox,
just funny.
Yeah.
What was the line, Vic? I'm coming. Was it Martha?
Yeah.
No,
I'm coming, honey. Yeah, Martha.
Elizabeth.
I'm coming for you.
Yeah. And that's how JB is. JB is just funny. If you're around him, he is just a funny guy.
And all those guys who are just funny, Vic, are storytellers.
Yeah.
Richard Pryor, a storyteller. Fred Sanford, a storyteller.
Kevin Hart is a storyteller.
I'll tell you something else interesting too, because I had a conversation with JB just a couple of weeks ago, and I was actually talking to him about comedians and how comedians have different styles. And one of the things that he shared with me is that he also has a physical style.
Yeah.
But it requires something different because there's a different degree of vulnerability in a physical style because you're already putting yourself out there. And every time a comedian steps on stage, you're setting yourself up to be judged by the audience. When you inject that physical style of comedy, it takes it to a whole other level. Yeah. Because you're opening yourself up to a different type of judgment. He is a very physical actor, style comedian. The other thing I would say about him is he also he's done a lot of different things. And like I apply the way that he approaches his comedy in a lot of ways to kind of how I think about life. Like for example, he auditioned for Saturday Night Live years ago and did not get selected as a cast member. It was actually the same class as Keenan, who has been a longtime cast member now, and Finesse Mitchell, who ended up being a cast member. But they asked him to stay on as a writer. And he didn't really want to do that because it wasn't what he auditioned for, and he felt like it was kind of a consolation prize. But he also thought about the opportunities it afforded him. They were in the same building with Conan O'Brien. Right. So he got a chance to do some stuff with Conan O'Brien. They would pick his brain about different stuff. He got a chance, being a writer, to get acquainted with Tina Fey, other folks that he's worked with since then. So he really is also one of those people that's always thinking ahead about, you know how Wayne Gretzky talked about skating
Yeah.
where the puck is going to
Where
be.
it's going.
That's
Right.
his philosophy. That's how he thinks about his career.
Well, knowing that Curb Your Enthusiasm is ending, I'm sure he's got his next steps in mind too.
Yeah, yeah. He's got some things in irons in the fire. We even talked a little bit about how that happens, how that unfolds, and I asked him if he was at a place now where he has to seek out opportunities, do opportunities seek him out, and his response first was, "I have an agent who's supposed to do that, but I've had to go through a few because if I've got to outwork you, I
Yeah.
don't need to."
Yeah.
But he is at a point now where people seek him out, but he has said, if they got to come directly to me, then I'm working too hard because I've got somebody else that's supposed to be doing that.
Yeah.
Well, when you were talking about that vulnerability and that physical style, it did evoke for me your social media presence, Vic, and some of your own personal. Hey, so Vic, we've really done a little bit more than usual, but our first segment is about us learning something about you or the audience that they might not know. So we've done that. And the next thing we do is we take a blank piece of paper, and John and I try to decide, what is Vic a super fan of? We're going to just write something down on the paper, and then you're going to tell us who's the winner if one of us is in the ballpark.
Okay.
And super fan, John, I'm going to my first UFC fight tomorrow in the Sphere. I'm not proud of it, Vic, but I've become a super fan of the ultimate fighting in the octagon. I'm gonna, John, what are you a super fan of?
Hook 'em horns, man. I'm a Texas Longhorn.
Texas Liner. All right, so John, here we go. Let's write something down.
Right,
I think Vic is a fan of.
And I want you to know, Vic, that it's amazing what David can do in just a few seconds. So,
John, you go first.
Magic here.
You go first, John. What do you think Vic is a super fan of, John?
All right. I was going to say the obvious things like physical fitness, weightlifting. This is way, though.
I'm glad you went out there. Let's see it. Vegan barbecue. That is a crazy response. Is that warm at all? I'm going to say that's ice cold.
It is. I'm not a fan of vegan barbecue. I don't eat. He's close because I don't eat meat. I'm not a meat eater, but I've never had vegan barbecue. So I can't.
Yeah. I thought I knew that you were. You didn't eat meat.
I'm
and you're in the land of barbecue, so I thought I'd just put those things together.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So Vic, but I got to tell you, John, when you're raised in North Carolina, and especially Eastern North Carolina, as I was raised,
right.
If you either eat Eastern North Carolina barbecue or you don't. You don't substitute it with vegan barbecue or any other barbecue.
Yep.
And you don't, Vic? I
don't. I'm pescatarian, so
okay.
I don't eat meat at all.
Well, I knew it was a mistake to start out the program with JB Smoove, and now John's going to try to. All right, so I said, Vic, you were a super fan of Dak Prescott.
Yes.
Here we go.
Yes.
So, but he likes vegan barbecue, Vic.
Hey, he can like whatever he likes as long as he's winning.
So, Vic,
look,
we're gonna get to your passion and your work, Vic. But I just have to know. So we just paid Dak a record amount to be the best regular season quarterback in NFL history. He's not been very good at the playoffs.
Yeah.
Was it a good call or not, Vic?
It's a good call. I mean, first of all, Dak, while he has not been that effective in the playoffs, part of that I would say is also the situations they put him in. So I think that's part of it. Part of it is
the owner.
Well, we won't bring up the owner. Part of it, I think, is I think Dak is also maturing. So I think he's growing. But I also think that you're at a place where you've got to decide. Can I do better? And you can't. I mean, are you going to go back in the market and find a better quarterback than Dak Prescott? I don't think so. And I would also say, while he's not had a lot of success in the playoffs to this point, there have been lesser quarterbacks who have won Super Bowls.
Oh,
so
of course.
Dak to me is he's a better regular season quarterback than Eli Manning, who won 2 Super Bowls. So if he can just find his stride in the playoffs, I think we're in good shape.
Vic, are you ready? Thank you for that. I think that's right. And after Sunday, I'm feeling good, but I do every year that I have the best regular season quarterback out there. Tony Romo was also the best regular season quarterback out there, and we didn't
Yeah.
win any playoffs. So,
Right.
Vic, I have a present for you.
Okay.
Vic, welcome to the Strong Talk logo without a naked baby. He's got a diaper on.
Oh yeah, that is cool.
I
That is
love
so
it.
cool.
I
Yeah,
love
I'm telling you, I got into all kinds of trouble trying to use my logo on social media because the baby is naked. My son is naked on the original picture. Who would have thunk it?
Well, there you go, Vic. A non-naked baby
Yeah.
on your and Vic, that little baby that was on your bicep back so many years ago.
Yeah.
How tall is that little baby now?
That little baby now, he's almost he's 12 years old, but he wears a size 12 shoe. So he definitely wouldn't fit on my arm anymore.
I was going to ask if you could put him on his arm now, but
No.
maybe you could fit on his arm. It sounds like.
Just about. I will tell you this though, David. I will tell you a passion of mine that you would never guess. That I am a lifelong fan of professional wrestling. That is that one is my guilty pleasure.
Talk
Ric
about
Flair.
strong talk.
Ric Flair was my childhood hero.
Yeah.
Ric Flair. So my father grew up, he didn't have a TV, but he went to a neighbor's to watch wrestling. I don't remember if he said it was Friday nights when he was growing up in the 40s and 50s that wrestling was the thing.
Are you asking me as a frame of reference what happened in the 40s and 50s? I just want to be clear.
Well, but my guess is your father also watched wrestling.
And do you have siblings that you wrestled with?
I had two brothers that one that was about a year and a half older, one's a year younger. So yeah, we did our share of wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrestled in high school. I actually was a state champion wrestler when I was 12 or 13. I was on a community wrestling team, and I won a state wrestling championship when I was probably 13 years old.
Love it.
Is this the next career? Are you thinking, you've got so many accolades. What about professional wrestling?
Yeah, me and John Cena, who knows?
Vic Armstrong, it's time for our good news segment. And wow, 2 years and a little bit in, we had 988 Day.
Yeah.
Pretty stunning the way that this simple concept, September the 8th at 8 a.m., no judgment, just help, and so much great stuff in the media. Here's Monica Johnson, our director of 988 Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office, from SAMHSA, going all TikTok with us. Of course, the assistant secretary did a great YouTube statement. And John, there was so much, but I saw Representative Elison with some great work in Utah. John, Vic, what did you guys do for 988 Day?
Vic, what did you do? Actually, I was traveling on 988 Day because I was actually doing a presentation for a local group here in North Carolina that does a lot of health education. So I was doing a presentation for the annual conference. So I was doing what I would perceive to be good work that day, and really, and I actually took some time to talk about 988, which to me, in my professional career, is probably the single biggest advancement that I've seen in probably my 30 years of doing this work.
I had so many days and nights where I was sleepless with 988 that I just raised a glass and went to sleep on 988. That was it. At 8 p.m. Exactly.
Well, John, we've talked about friends and family. Let's get into Vic himself.
Let's do it. Vic, you heard all went on and on about all the things that you've accomplished, but there were many years before that when you were perhaps wrestling that you were imagining what your life was going to be like. And somewhere along the way, you went from wrestling to this titan of mental health. How did you get from that to social work, to mental health care, and suicide? Tell us about that.
That's a good question, because I describe it really as an evolution. I'll tell you, I grew up in rural North Carolina, son of a preacher. My father was a pastor. My father actually pastored for 48 years. So I grew up in a very, very small world, because everything was black and white. We were in a rural community. We didn't see a lot of things that were, everything that I grew up being socialized around was really kind of small town stuff. I didn't know what a social worker was. I was really socialized in the church growing up, so that was a big part of my life. And but it was very small in the sense that everybody was kind of fit into very small, narrow categories. And as I got older, I started to question things, and that was kind of the beginning, I think, of my evolution. I actually graduated from undergrad with a degree in business management, and my goal was to be a banker. And that was really because growing up, all I knew was I wanted to go to work clean and come home clean. I did farm work growing up. Didn't want to do that.
That was your aspiration. I just
That
wanted
was my
to
aspiration. I did not. I worked on my great uncle's farm, and in his mind, he was going to train me to be a farmer. In my mind, I was going to be anything but a farmer. So I went into banking. I worked in banking for a couple of years and realized it was not for me. And I took a job working at a Department of Social Services, really because I just wanted to have something to do until I figured out which bank I was going to go to work for next. And I fell in love with human services. And I decided, this is what I want to do. This is where I feel that I have a passion. But if I was going to do that, I need to get a master's degree because I wanted to be able to run an organization. So I went back to graduate school, got my MSW. And in the process of doing that, I became really infatuated with psychopathology, just the study of, the human mind and probably more importantly, how we interact with one another and how we impact and influence one another. And that really led to my social work path. It really wasn't until several years into that career that I got into the suicide space. I think the thing that really kind of catapulted me into this space was when I started working for hospital systems about 12, 14 years ago. And knowing that, the primary goal of a hospital, above and beyond all else, is to avoid preventable deaths. And, I saw situations where that was really not what was happening. We had people, and I ran a mental health hospital, and I saw people walk in the door with suicidal thinking, and sometimes walking out the door still struggling and not knowing how they were going to address that. And I saw people ending up in our emergency departments seeking resources that they should have been able to find at the community level, but they couldn't. And so I began to really focus and lean into what I could do to mitigate those things. And that's really where I got into my passion for crisis services and for suicide prevention, and especially kind of going back to my childhood roots and remembering that growing up all those years in the church, I never heard about mental health. And I know what a huge part of my socialization growing up the church was, but it was not a place where we talked about mental health. We didn't talk about suicide. If we did, it was in a very negative connotation. And so all of that, I think, prompted me to really think about what can I do differently? What can I do to make a change? And what can I take back to communities like the community I grew up in?
But you did learn service to your community from church.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that always sticks with me. And I think when I think about the lessons I learned from my father, one of the things I still have memories of, some of my earliest memories are of my father standing up behind a pulpit. And I just remember marveling at the way people hung on his words and what he was saying. And I think that's also why I enjoy public speaking. My wife says my two favorite things are an audience and a photo op. But I think some of that comes from growing up with a father who was in the ministry
and watching wrestling. Yeah.
And watching wrestling.
So Vic, we were going to do this a little bit later, but we're going to advance it, and that's a little segment we're calling "The Challenges of Being a PK."
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Vic, I'm going to mention a challenge, and you tell me on a scale of 1 to 5 how big a challenge this was for you. 5 being, yeah, it was a lot. To 1, not so much.
Okay.
High expectations. You're expected to be holier than your father, and he's literally the pastor. No pressure, right? Just don't trip in front of the congregation.
That's a 5.
A 5. All right. Lack of privacy. Your every move is public
Oh
information.
my God.
Aunt Linda already knows you skipped Sunday school. A 6. All right. Identity struggles. Am I a future pastor, or am I just really good at hiding during altar calls?
You know what? I have to tell you, growing up, especially if you are a preacher's kid and you have any interest or any capacity for talking in front of people, every little old lady in church told me, you're going to be a preacher. You are going to be, I see it all over. You're going to be a preacher. So I heard that from an early age. So those expectations have always been there.
Isolation, trying to make friends while everyone assumes you'll start quoting scripture mid-conversation.
Yeah, that not so much because it was a small community. Everybody went to church.
Pressure to conform. Everyone's look at you when the preacher talks about modesty.
Never really thought about that one. I'm gonna give that one a 2.
Resentment toward the church. While your friends' parents are watching Netflix, your mom and dad are at church again.
You know what? Netflix wasn't a thing when I was growing up, but I did not get to go to movies and dances and things like that. So it was a big deal.
Rebellion. The stereotype is real, but let's be honest. Rebelling as a PK often means sneaking into secular music or gasp PG-13 movies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was not allowed to listen to anything that was not gospel music, but I had my little radio in my bedroom and I would tune in to the R&B stations at night and so yeah, it was a real thing.
Last one, Vic. Struggles with faith. If you haven't questioned everything at least once, are you even a PK?
You know what? That's a big one because I was taught to take the Bible literally. And as I've gotten older, I understand better kind of the nuances and challenges that people face, and that there's oftentimes gray area, and so that was a challenge for me. I still have conversations today with my dad, especially as we talk about, and suicide is one of those spaces that we have that conversation. We have it around sexual orientation and gender identity. There's a lot of things that my dad still kind of holds to those ideas that he learned early on as a pastor that I had to later learn that, you know what, I have to decide which pieces of this I'm going to hold on to, which pieces I'm going to let go.
Hey, Vic, pivoting just a little bit from that, you formed Strong Talk, this amazing podcast as part of sort of birthed in Crisis Jam, our 988 learning community, and becoming its own thing now with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Back in the early days of that Crisis Jam, as we were looking to 988, you were the leading voice of Let's Not Be 911, which was initially the opposite of embedding equity into the crisis space. And you were really focused on, we have to do this from the get-go. Vic, how are we doing 2 years into 988?
I have been pleasantly, I wouldn't say surprised. I was probably a little skeptical coming in as to how we're going to be able to do this because we were having to move at such a fast pace.
Right.
And so how can we bring people along and move forward at the same time? Because when you start having these conversations, not all communities enter into this conversation from the same place with the same lived experience. And so I had questions about that, but I think we've done a really good job of trying to balance the two. How do we engage historically marginalized communities? How do we find those trusted voices, find that trusted message? And at the same time, how do we continue to move forward and build on 988? So it's been a delicate balance, but I think, the folks like you mentioned, Monica Johnson and folks like Monica and Brandon Johnson and Tia Dole and folks like that, I think have done an amazing job of leading this work.
Well, I'm also wondering, Vic, I mean, while we're making progress and you're noting some of the progress by some of the leadership that we've established in 988 and how they're influencing things. I'm also thinking 5 years ahead, and maybe even 10, but let's start with 5. If we were to fast forward 5 years from now, what would you hope to see in terms of equity and difference between now and 5 years from now? And how would we see that difference? How would we measure that difference that would say, we're definitely making progress
Yeah.
in 5 years from now? Where do you think we should be making that progress?
So a couple of things. One is I'd say we have to, and I think we're making progress in this space. We have got to get better at measuring the disparity. We have historically measured the impact on the total population. Are we moving the needle on the total population? And I think we learned, especially during the COVID pandemic, when we had to lean into different communities differently because we didn't have trusted relationships with them. So I think that's one of the areas where, I think that we're still growing. But I think that's one of the areas where, we'll continue to see things evolve. The other thing I'd say is that we do a much better job, I think, of informing the public about what to do if you are the person experiencing the mental health emergency. I think we got work to do in educating the rest of the bystanders about what to do when you see someone experiencing a mental health emergency. Because part of what I know is different is there is a different type of response depending on who's experiencing the emergency. If if a 35-year-old white female is standing in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina today, where I am, and she's having a mental health emergency, there's going to be one type of response. If me, as a Black man, were to go into a mental health emergency, and you could know that both of us were experiencing mental health challenges, the response is going to be very different. The response to me is going to be, let's protect ourselves from him. Not let's protect him, but let's protect ourselves from him. And so I want to see us create more energy around how do we use 988 as a resource for other people that we witness that are going into crisis, as opposed to just, here's what you call when you are the person having the crisis. So I think I'd like to see those things. I would love to see. I don't want to have more conversations as I have in the past year or so with Black men in particular who, will ask me, why should I trust this number?
Right.
Why would I call this number? And I want us to get past that.
Yeah. So Vic, it's time for trivia, and I need you to help me out because John Draper's his head's a little bit like this big right now. We had our first expert crisis trivia in the Crisis Jam on Wednesday, and he just nailed it to the wall. So can you help me bring him down a bit?
That's a tall order.
All right, well, let's try it. Let's try it. So we have 2 over-under questions today.
Okay.
And both John is going to do the number, Vic, and you're going to do is John over or under. So first, we're going to start with white Americans and weekly church attendance.
Okay.
According to the robots, what percentage of Americans attend church services weekly? White Americans, what percentage attend church weekly, John?
White Americans, I'm going to say 10%.
Vic, is it over or under?
Over.
All right, we're going to hold that. We're going to come back to the answer. Let's go to the Black church. Here's a African Episcopalian church. John, what percentage of Black Americans go to church weekly? You said 10% for white Americans.
I'm going to say 40%.
Over or under, Vic?
I am going to say that is over also.
Over also. So let's go back to white. John, I would have said 10%. I was a little stunned. And I think this is the deal, when we get into these political divides in rural America, and 25 to 30% of white Americans go to church weekly.
Wow.
Now that's not happening in my community in the city, or maybe I'm just, again, it's my perspective, and I don't.
Is this
Vic,
wishful thinking, though? Is this they would like to be going weekly?
no, I think
All
this
right.
is. I think it's hard for you and me because
Yeah.
Vic. Until I met Rosa, I didn't go to church, and now I'm in the Catholic Church at least on Christmas, and I didn't go before, so.
Yeah.
So it's over, John. It's over. African Americans, last chance, Vic. You said over 40 to 45%.
Yeah.
I'm going to say you're both right, John. I'm going to say you nailed this, and Vic, I'm going to say you're right with the over. The robots say 40 to 45%.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that
Vic,
sounds right.
talk a little bit, because what the robots say is you got to understand within Black Protestant denominations, Baptist and Methodist traditions, this is not just a spiritual hub, but a center for social,
Absolutely.
cultural, and political activity on top.
Yeah, I mean, even for me growing up, it's where I was socialized. It's the first place we came to for our social services. If a family needed help with a light bill, they came to the church. If a family had a child that was struggling with addiction, they came to the church. So it was the first place that I can remember coming to that was really kind of a one-stop shop for all your social determinants. So it wasn't just the place you came to for your spiritual needs, but it was also where we came to for our physical needs. And so, and then the other thing I think that there's always been a connection between the Black community and faith, even through slavery. That was the hope. That's why you saw, slaves that would sing spirituals as they were working. So that's always been a part of our history. And the other thing with the church is that the church has been the place that has not only signaled to the community outside of the Black community, or not only signaled to us within the Black community kind of what's important, but also signaled to folks outside the community what's important. That's why I think the political piece comes in, because it was a way for us internally to galvanize, but it was also a way to signal to folks outside of our congregations what was important to us. Now, I will say that part of why I do the work I do now with the church and with faith-based organizations is because the church has also done a lot of damage in the mental health space with misinformation and being uninformed, and so because it's such a
Vic, you called it a one-stop. John, did you hear that? A one-stop shop. John.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're wondering about this soul shop for Black churches that you're doing here.
Yeah.
Vic, please tell us about that. I think you're about to segue into that right now, because the work you're doing with churches is really thinking about how to integrate mental health in some really thoughtful, meaningful ways for these congregations.
Yeah. And I think, for me, and I have to frame it this way, because I think oftentimes when we talk about doing work with a faith-based community, there are some people get turned off because they've been hurt by the church. But I frame it this way. I think of it really as access. Because when we think about access and how we create access, especially in historically marginalized communities, I always argue that access is not just about more traditional resources. Access is about resources that are relatable to my lived experience, that are culturally relevant, and resources that I am willing to utilize. And so by training faith leaders how to minister to congregants that are experiencing suicidal desperation, we're creating access into the Black community to reach, to connect them to mental health resources. And so thinking about that pastor, because statistically, Black people are more likely to go to a faith leader than a psychiatrist, psychologist, sociologist, or social worker. And so knowing that they're going to be going to the faith leader, it makes sense for us to equip the faith leader to be able to give them the right kind of information and to be a conduit to connect them to other resources. So thinking about how you incorporate the faith-based organizations into your system of care. What we've done with Soul Shop is it's an 8-hour workshop, and it's designed to teach faith leaders. And we use the word faith leaders loosely. There are pastors, but there are also lay members. I have clinicians that come to the training. Deacons, youth leaders. But we teach them in that one of the first things that we try to do is share the data. Because one of the challenges with the Black community is that we've been socialized to believe suicide is not a Black problem. But sharing the data demonstrates that it is. Regardless of what you've heard, this is what the data says is happening. And I think the most shocking thing is when they learn about the increases in suicide rates among our young people. That gets the attention of folks quicker than anything when you start talking about the young people. But it's helping them to understand that in your congregations, on any given Sunday or Wednesday, whenever you're there, you have folks in your congregation who are either suicide attempt survivors themselves, people who are experiencing suicidation, even sitting in the congregation, people who have lost other folks to suicide, or people who are worried about someone they think may be suicidal. And when you have all that going on and you don't mention it and you don't create a welcoming environment for people who are experiencing that, and the only message they've heard is that all you need is to pray harder, all you need is more faith, that can actually cause people more pain. So we're trying to teach faith leaders how to deal with that and how to first do no harm. And then second, how do we connect people to the resources they need? How do we create resources where people live, work, play, and worship?
And Vic, I imagine as you give them those tools and resources, they recognize the mental health burdens that they're dealing with in their congregation are huge. I've heard from pastors that about 90% of the time that they take is with 10% of the population who are really suffering.
Yeah. One of the exercises we do as a part of the training is there's an exercise where we use from the Bible, use Job as an example, and we say, okay, on one side of a chart, flip chart, I will list all the reasons why, if Job is a person in your church, why Job may be hesitant about coming forward and asking for help.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, I'll list, if you are Job's pastor, what are all the reasons you would be uncomfortable with Job coming to you with his mental health challenges? And what we end up demonstrating is that it really is about pastors not wanting to do it because they feel like they're not equipped to do it.
Yeah.
And if we can equip you to know how to handle it, they welcome these conversations because faith leaders want to be able to minister to people's needs. They just don't know how to minister to the mental health piece, and they rely on the piece that they know. They know prayer, and they know how to grab a hold of scripture and apply scripture, but they don't know how to speak to people clinically. And so connecting them with clinical resources is really what we're trying to accomplish.
Vic, we made the Moving America's Soul on Suicide documentary and featured Kevin Berthea and titled that segment, Suicide's Not Just a White Thing. I was going to ask you about that, but you've really leaned into that quite a bit. John, I think we ought to talk about workforce.
Yeah, we've been really thinking a lot about how to do something about our workforce shortage, but we also have this challenge in crisis care of making sure that we have a workforce that represents the population that we're trying to reach and serve.
Yeah.
So Vic, I know you struggle with this too. How do we create a workforce that is both ample and diverse? And at the BHL, we've done a pretty good job. We've got almost 500 employees, and about 75% are African American. But I'm wondering how you think the rest of the network is doing, and what your sense of where we are with crisis services and that diversity.
Yeah, I think we have a challenge. And part of the reason I think we have a challenge is based on history. I mentioned that in my community growing up, there was a narrative that suicide was not an issue for the Black community. But what was also happening simultaneously is there was no message coming from outside my community saying, no, this is about you. It's about saving all lives. And so there was that gap. And if I can't see myself in your work, I can't see myself in your workforce. And so part of what we've got to start to do is, as we are having these conversations with communities and creating resources, we have to think about how do we create resources that people can see themselves in? Because if I identify with that, then I'm more likely to want a career in that space. But I also think that we have to think about how do we get there from here, and these are long-term things. We do have to think about things like, how do we work with the healthcare system? How do we work with residency programs? Because we don't even have enough residency slots to build the psychiatry team that we need tomorrow, Black or white or otherwise. But we do need to be thinking about how do we create resources to even have space for that next generation. But one of the things I think that we also have to do is we have to come up with, I think, a better definition, a clearer definition of who is in the mental health workforce, who is in the crisis workforce.
Right.
Because I look at the fact that I look at RI as an example. RI uses a lot of folks with lived experience. That's a part of your workforce. And when I look here in North Carolina, for example, we have some almost 5,000 certified peer support specialists. We probably got about 1,800 that are gainfully employed. That's a whole, that's a lot of people of all races, of all ages, of all ethnic backgrounds that have lived experience that we need to figure out how to incorporate in the workforce. I think that's a piece of it. I also think, we talk about, we were joking around about sports early on in the Cowboys. One of the things that I always, bring to people's attention is, major colleges, Clemson University, Alabama, Georgia, these major colleges, they know today who's in the 8th grade is going to be playing football for them 4 years from now.
Yeah,
we have to get better at looking into communities and identifying our workforce of tomorrow and then nurturing them. They are watching these young people. They're helping them to stay out of trouble. They're helping to keep them occupied. They're helping to keep them focused on the prize that one day you'll be playing for the University of Georgia. You just got to keep working out. If we could do that, we could reach into communities. And then cultural competency is no longer about teaching white people to speak Spanish. It's about reaching into communities of color and finding the generation of tomorrow. So I think we have to do all those things. We got to think about, how do we incentivize having people of color entering into this workforce? Are our residency programs, are they conducive to people of color being able to utilize them? Are they, can they afford them? Are we looking at being intentional about how we bring more people of color into these spaces? And it is important, I will say this, as a social worker, and I'm, trained as a clinical social worker, and I'm the first to say that a good clinician is a good clinician. But the thing we cannot lose sight of is it's not just about whether I, as a clinician, can relate to you. It's also about whether you can relate to me. And there are people out there who are only going to be able to relate to someone who understands the nuances of what it means to be a person of color in America. I hear all the time that Black men, for example, don't want mental health resources, don't access mental health resources. And I push back on that because I believe what Black men want are resources that speak to what it means to be a Black man in America. And I think all of those things are part of us building this more culturally competent, culturally relevant workforce.
Love all of that, Vic. And also, I hope my Mexican girlfriend was hearing that you said cultural competence is not white people learning Spanish.
That is correct.
Right? I hope she heard that because my Spanish is coming along very slowly, Vic. Very slowly. Vic, we have a final segment that we want to reflect on. A lot of your social media presence in the early years that I met you was you from the weight room. Yeah. And then you told me earlier today in a meeting we had earlier this morning that you had met Shaka Khan. Now, we've had a dispute. We've had a dispute within RI about whether you met Shaka Khan, the rapper, or Shaka Khan, the Recovery Innovations employee.
Well, first of all, Shaka Khan is not a rapper.
Singer.
So, yeah.
Tell me something good, please.
So let me say, first of all, I met Shaka Khan, the employee. But one of the things I shared with Shaka Khan, the employee, was that the greatest concert I have ever been to was a concert, and I believe it was in Greensboro, North Carolina, where Shaka Khan opened up for Prince. That was the best concert ever.
Wow.
Shaka Khan.
Did they play together?
They did.
Nice.
They did. She came back out and they did some stuff together. It was phenomenal. I'm a big fan of Shaka Khan, but when I first saw her name on the email, I thought, this is somebody's Twitter handle. This is not somebody's name.
Let me press on who would you rather meet? Shaka Khan, the singer, or Killer Mike, the rapper?
Shaka Khan.
So John and I are hoping that Killer Mike ultimately runs for mayor of Atlanta. What do you think?
He'd be so great.
Yeah, he probably has to do something about that name, though. I don't think Killer Mike. Because the first thing they say is killing pets and eating them. I don't think that's gonna.
Killer Mike has been to Behavioral Health Link in Atlanta.
Nice.
He visited us. Yeah. All right. So I have some either or. Who do you want to meet? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or Arnold Schwarzenegger? All your bodybuilding.
The Rock. Got to be The Rock.
Okay, The Rock. You want to meet also fitness, but a little bit different. Scarlett Johansson or Zendaya?
Oh. I'm going to go with Scarlett Johansson only because Zendaya still seems like a child to me. So I'm going to go with Scarlett Johansson.
All right. Chris Hemsworth or Michael B. Jordan? Which one more? They're both Marvel Universe folks.
Yeah, I got to go with Thor. I got to go with Thor.
Oh, man, I would really be surprised you go past. What wasn't Michael B. Jordan in Creed like the?
He was in Creed, but yeah,
you go with Chris Hemsworth. All right,
you're talking about Thor.
Yeah, fair enough. Tom Holland or Leonardo DiCaprio?
Tom Holland.
Margot Robbie or Jennifer Lawrence?
Didn't matter who you said after that. Margot Robbie.
Okay, all right. The first scene in Barbie with the homage to 2001, just off the charts. So, LeBron James or Cristiano Ronaldo?
LeBron James.
Jackie Chan or Conor McGregor? I'm going to UFC tomorrow.
Jackie Chan.
And then two more. Zac Efron.
But I do want to hang out with Conor McGregor.
Zac Efron got in shape for Baywatch. Zac Efron or Jake Paul?
Oh, Zac Efron.
Yeah.
And then finally, have Thor Bjornsson. He was the Mountain in Game of Thrones, if you remember. He's a famous weightlifter and fitness person. Have Thor Bjornsson or Terry Crews, former NFL and now media star.
Terry Crews. Yeah, Terry Crews has a fascinating story. So definitely Terry Crews.
So Vic, wow, what a great conversation and what great work you're doing. But it brings us now, John, to the absolutely true tales of Behavioral Health Link.
Let's see how absolutely true they are, Vic.
So I am going to actually go back a little bit. It was before I joined Behavioral Health Link. In fact, this is an actual picture of me, John.
PK, yes.
But I was an assistant. This is like a million years ago, Vic, but I was an assistant pastor in a church in Memphis, Tennessee. And we had a congregation that was a diverse congregation, and we had a young man who died of suicide in our congregation. The family wanted me to come to their community, to the black church that they were from, small black church. They wanted me to give the eulogy sermonette kind of thing. But it was my first time to be, I was in an small all black church, and I was up there, the one behind the pulpit. And I began speaking, and I'm like, what is going on? And I looked over my shoulder, and I'm trying to talk, and there's a guy on the piano behind me going with me. And at first I'm like, this is so awkward. I don't know what's going on here. And within about 10 minutes, I was like, come on, dude, stay with me. We're going.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a thing, Vic?
That's a thing. It starts out with dum dum. Every time you say dum dum, and then it can kind of build, and before you know it, you gotta hold it, and then the folks start dancing and
a eulogy accompaniment. Oh my God.
John, that's an absolutely true tale.
It's hard to believe. I'm not sure I believe it. David, should I believe it?
I believe it because it was almost like, John, if you think about the way that black people react when they see a white guy who can pop lock or break dance, or a white guy who can rap, all of a sudden, you want to be a part of that. So you see it. David must have really been laying into this eulogy. Because all of a sudden the pianist's like, I got to get some of this. He's like, I can
want to see those dance moves that David put on at the funeral. I mean, that's amazing. That must have been.
You know what? One of the things I did in my master's degree in community agency counseling, which was there in Memphis at the University of Memphis, was I studied grief across populations. And watched movies like ordinary people with normal white grief, but went to Black church to experience some stereotypical grief in that setting, and it is just the differences are so stark.
It's a bloodletting, yes.
I would, Dave, if you ever want to see an example of grief in the Black community, go to a cookout and show up with the potato salad. Tell everybody you made the potato salad. You'll see grief pretty quickly.
John Draper, that brings us to some, I was going to say new rules. It brings us to plain truth, John.
Yeah, I've got a little plain truth for you all.
Let's hear some plain truth, John.
Yeah, it's a memory for me too. Since we launched the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in 2005, a critical Lifeline National Advisory Committee was our Consumer Survivor Committee, which is now called the Lived Experience Committee, and its members were national experts and advisors from high-risk and marginalized communities we sought to reach to prevent suicide. But in 2008, Bishop William Young joined our committee to advise on ways that we could more effectively reach and serve people in the African-American communities who are at risk. Now, Bishop Young was a Vietnam vet, a licensed professional and pastoral counselor, and bishop of the Healing Center Full Gospel Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Bishop Young and his equally dynamic wife and partner, Reverend Diane Young, has been hosting a biannual national conference at a local college campus since 2003, which is called Suicide in the Black Church. At that time, and as we've been hearing from Vic, it's always been seen as kind of a white problem, and was not really seen as something that the church should be dealing with at that time. Bishop Young told me what inspired his interest in suicide prevention was this, that early one morning, just before Easter in 2002, a depressed middle-aged woman stood holding a pistol under the 20-foot cross that hangs above the entrance of his Healing Center Full Gospel Baptist Church. And there she took her life. This tragedy on church grounds shook the entire congregation. There was finger-pointing, rage, and grief everywhere the Youngs turned. This was a sign from God, they thought. They saw that they needed to reimagine their ministry and confront the stigma and myths surrounding suicide and mental health in the Black church. When I met the Youngs, they had just opened up their first emotional fitness center on church grounds, the seed of what was to become a network of state-funded, church-based counseling centers that provide free mental health screenings, support groups, access to nurse practitioners, and referrals to Memphis area mental health services. It's now called the Stress and Wellness Clinic, but they initially called it the Emotional Fitness Center intentionally to avert the stigma related to seeking mental health assistance in the Black communities. Bishop Young would tell me, who doesn't want to be fit? In his first 6 years, the Healing Center and 6 other Black churches in Memphis screened, supported, and referred 2,500 people for care in the community, people who really needed this care. And that credibility and authority of the church, the trust that the church had established in the community, that's what they leveraged to reduce the stigma and open the door for people to seek help. Bishop Young was a licensed therapist, so he understood the importance of integrating mental health services into his faith-based mission to support his congregation. But I wondered if the state of Tennessee could fund this, could federal and state governments fund and encourage more of these types of services to be co-designed where high-risk and marginalized populations regularly convene in their community? Look, it's not exactly pie in the sky to imagine co-designing crisis and behavioral health programs with the communities that are intended to serve. Crisis services have been doing something similar for over 20 years. In the late 90s, I worked with the city's Department of Mental Health to establish and fund distinct 24/7 hotlines for Spanish-speaking and Cantonese and Mandarin-speaking populations in New York City, with trained bilingual and trilingual specialists to answer calls, and bilingual and trilingual outreach managers from those communities to promote the services with their local leaders and local culture-specific broadcast and print media. It can be done. The VCL is designed and operated by the VA, with mostly veterans operating the services. The Trevor Project's LGBTQI plus services have been designed and operated by LGBTQI plus individuals and stakeholders. The same user co-design model is true of the Washington State's Native Strong Line for Indigenous Americans. And of course, the 988 Deaf and Hard of Hearing American Sign Language Service is also operated by people who are deaf and hard of hearing. They have all recognized the need for these services in their communities and have joined partners to help build and fund them. Now, we're also seeing culture-specific and community-engaged mental health care approaches being established in the workplace suicide prevention space. Our good friend Sally Spencer-Thomas, Sarah Gare, Eduardo Vega, they're all working with the construction industry, with firefighters and other private industry partners to build peer-driven support services. In professional sports, all NFL and NBA teams have embedded mental health counselors and behavior specialists into their staffing, and they regularly hang out with the team members as part of their culture. More schools are including psychologists or social workers to provide mental health assistance in the setting where they spend many of their waking weekday hours. So how could more of this co-design work be funded? The federal government is investing in certified community behavioral health center model to enhance evidence-informed, integrated, and comprehensive care services for communities and states across the country, including 24/7 crisis services. The federal government has also stated a commitment to improve equity and access in behavioral health care in historically marginalized communities. Is it time for the federal government to also establish funding streams for states to provide grants to community partners towards co-designing care models with the communities that have traditionally been underserved? I think so. So before I end, I got to tell you about how wonderful it was for me to attend 4 of the 10 biannual Suicide in the Black Church conferences in Memphis. As a white cisgender male, it's not often I walk into professional spaces where I'm just about the only white guy in the room, but I felt at home with the Youngs. They treated me like family, and their congregation and conference attendees welcomed me into their experience with warmth, grace, and respect. And I do mean it was an experience. They were perhaps my favorite conference experiences in suicide prevention because they brought the full weight of love and spirituality into it, replete with outstanding researchers and leaders in suicide prevention, faith leaders, amazing gospel music, and soul food. And one year when I had the honor of presenting, my talk preceded one from a legendary pastor who had marched with Martin Luther King. And after I finished with my PowerPoint presentation, Pastor slowly walked up to the podium after me and he said something like this. He said, "I want to thank Dr. Draper for his wonderful PowerPoint presentation. And I wondered, should I have a PowerPoint?" And the Reverend then thrusted his forefinger to the ceiling and he declared, "And I remember, I do have a PowerPoint." This moving presentation was another reminder of 2 things to me. Never share a stage with a Baptist preacher, and make sure that you've not only the right message, but the right messenger for the right audience. And lastly, Reverend Diane informed me that Bishop Young transitioned in October 2022, but his legacy lives on in the Healing Center and in the 10th Suicide and Black Church National Conference that occurred last year. As long as Bishop Young's legacy endures, Memphis will always have a PowerPoint. David, that's a wrap.
And that's some plain truth, John and Vic. Look, we definitely don't want to follow Bishop Young, and we don't want to follow Vic Armstrong either. These are amazing leaders. Vic, thank you so much for being on the program today. And all of you, please be sure to join us next week when we'll have another friend on, Eduardo Vega. Amazing leader. John, you and I and Eduardo worked together with the Lifelines Steering Committee and SAMHSA going back to 2005. And Eduardo was bringing these concepts of hope, recovery, and lived experience, what he calls lived expertise.
Yes.
For almost 20 years ago now. So thanks for letting us draw you all in this week. Come back next time as we continue to navigate the currents of crisis and care. Until then, remember, every call, every life, every story matters. Stay connected, stay supportive, and we'll see you on the next episode of Lifeline.